Hello everyone, how we doing today? I was doing okay up until right before class. I went to the restroom right before I went to class and I was opening the door and I had to cough and I was like ready to cover my mouth and everything. Dr. Bai showed up right around the door at the same time I did, and I was so surprised I didn't cover my mouth and coughed all over. So it may have cost us a finance professor. I apologize. It was very embarrassing. He actually said it was gross and I agreed with him. It was gross. Yeah. Why don't you go take pleasure in my pain? We got presentations today. Real quick before we get started on presentations. This is something that's we got multiple emails about, so I want to make an announcement. Please note that next week we do have a final exam, okay? There have been false rumors spread that we're not having a final exam in this course. There will be a meeting and final exam. It'll be at 1:30 p.m. on Tuesday. You're not required to show up for the final exam, but if you do show up for the final exam, you'll be taking the final exam. Some people have been saying, I don't have a final exam, which is strictly not true. Okay. You do have a final exam. You will get a grade for it. And if you show up, I will give you a final exam. But the only reason why is because we're required to meet on final exam days if we don't have a final exam. So if you're telling me you don't have a final exam, then you're going to be joining me on Tuesday. So would everybody agree that we do have a final exam in this course? Okay, great. All right. So by the way, if you are planning on taking the final exam, please make sure you notify me and let me know. I'm working on just cleaning some stuff up in the final exam. We do have some people taking it, but I want to make sure that I get a full list. Please let me know by the end of this week. Nobody in the class is required to, but you're certainly welcome to if that's your decision to do so. All right, let's get started. We'll go ahead and start with group one, which is going to be presenting on governmentally accepted or generally accepted governmental auditing standards in the United States. Yeah, I guess.
Now you can't make fun of us if we say it wrong.
There is no correct pronunciation.
Can you switch? Do a switch. We'll be talking about the generally accepted governmental auditing standards in the United States, or GAGAs for short. I'm Grace.
I'm Tommy.
I'm Kate.
I'm Megan.
Anna. So it's pretty self-explanatory that GAGAs is so it's pretty self-explanatory that GAGAs is talks about is for government entities, but it also applies to any non-governmental entities that are receiving funding. So this could include nonprofits that receive government grants, or for-profits such as daycares or low-income housing units that are receiving grants. And all these government auditing standards are found in the Yellow Book, which is has recently been published, as Tommy will talk about, and right now it's around 250 pages long, so it's a pretty long read. And GAGAs is pretty similar to generally accepted auditing standards, but there are some differences. So one of those differences is GAGAs has a more extreme view on internal controls. So under GAS, if there are no internal controls, it's viewed as a reason for further search, and under GAGAs, it's deemed unacceptable to not have internal controls. Also, there's a lot of different laws and regulations, and there's a lot of like with grants, there's a lot of other, like, not just financial, but there's other things to be aware of as well, such as advertising requirements for a nonprofit that's receiving funding. So that's important to keep in mind as an auditor.
So now for a little bit of background. In the 1960s, there was a lot more government funding that was being handed out to different programs in the United States. And this kind of brought to the attention that there was no oversight of these programs and where the money was being spent. And obviously, if the funding was coming from the federal government, it was most likely coming from taxes. So they kind of decided that the Comptroller General of the U.S., state auditors, federal officials decided that there needed to be some standards to kind of have some checks on where this funding was going. So this led to the Government Accountability Office initiating a plan to make governmental auditing standards in 1969. The initial work for this began in 1970, where they kind of surveyed the needs to decide what exactly should be included in this. The Government Accountability Office is kind of in charge. So them, along with federal departments and agencies, state and local auditors, and then other professional accounting organizations like the AICPA, kind of sat down and decided what was going to be in these standards. And that is what led to the standards for audits and of governmental organizations, programs, activities, and functions being introduced in June of 1972. That's a really long title for governmental auditing standards. And obviously a lot of things have changed since 1972, and especially with technology, a lot of standards would need to be changed. And obviously basically any standard you're going to get for anything is going to have to be changed because nothing's ever 100% perfect on the first try. So there have been many revisions that have taken place. The first one started in 1979, so 7 years after it was introduced, and that was officially signed in 1981 by the Comptroller General. And then the latest revision was in 2024, and that will take effect here soon, like Tommy will talk about later.
What about now? So we're currently on the 2018 revision, but soon in December 15th, 2025, we'll go to the 2024 revision. Each revision goes through an extensive deliberate process, which includes input from many different sources, financial experts, financial and performance auditing experts, and reporting experts. These come from the federal, state, or local governments, private sector, and academia. And essentially, more specifically, what GAGAs are and what's included in them. It's basically the rules from GAS and the AICPA framework with some extra stuff. Like we mentioned before, internal controls are actually included in GAGAs versus, like we said earlier, it was a separate audit of ICFRS. So yeah, it's baked into the GAGAs framework. Another big thing is the quality and the qualifications of the auditors. So one big thing is you must be CPA licensed, and you also have to have continued professional education. The specific requirements are 80 hours in the last 2 years, and 24 of those hours being in specific government auditing. Another couple of more things about quality, the audit follow-up and external peer review. Audit follow-up, similar to what normal audits have, you have to have more extensive requirements to go back and correct stuff that were maybe materially incorrect. And also external peer reviews that are specific to GAGAs. They have every 3 years you must participate in an external peer review of someone else's audit. And in these governmental audits, basically, you can look at any of the audits in the prior 3 years of an entity, and you have to make sure that everything is still in compliance with GAGAs. And this just helps maintain the quality and assurance to the public. Next, what's more included in the GAGAs framework in the GAGAs, they have standards for many types of assurance. These include financial audits, attestation engagements, and performance audits. They also have standards for some of the things I mentioned earlier with like quality. They also have standards for independence. Independence is a big thing in normal audits, and of course GAGAs audits. They have like flowcharts and everything about what is independence for GAGAs specifically, and how independence is impaired. They go very extensive in that. And then lastly, they have the ethical framework, pretty similar to normal auditing, except for some key things. One of them is that it's in the public, that auditors must work in the public interest. Normally for audits is for the shareholders, but essentially in government audits, the public interest, the people, the population of America is basically the shareholders. And they have much more of a level of assurance to provide, since we all expect the government to work for us, not work for themselves. So the auditors have to make sure that the public is satisfied and assured that the government is working for them, being transparent and things like that. Integrity, activity, and professional behavior are pretty similar to normal audits, but one thing more specific to government audits is the proper use of government information. Similar to how you wouldn't want your auditor to insider trade on private or public companies, you wouldn't want, well, it's important not to disclose possibly national security risks to the public. So they have specific rules on how to handle that. If information that is required that would be required but can't be disclosed on a public report is part of the audit. There are rules to make sure that these are disclosed, and so that people know that there are things that are omitted. And there's a lot of other rules into that, but that's essentially what the ethical framework is.
Okay, so future considerations, as Simon mentioned, the 2024 doesn't take into effect until basically 2026 because it's December 15th, 2025. So it sounds like it's in the past, but it's not, it's coming up. And one of the main things I wanted to highlight from it was a switch from a system of quality control to quality management. So basically, quality management is just assuring that the audit organization, the audits and the reports follow professional standards and applicable laws. And so these auditors are going to be required to have a system of quality management in place by December 15th, 2025. And then it must be evaluated by an audit organization by next year in December 15th, 2026. And this switch was basically made to just strengthen and modernize an audit organization's system of managing engagement quality. So this old system of quality control, it was more reactive and focused on finding the problems and fixing them as they are found. And this new system is going to be a lot more proactive and looking at the risk beforehand to prevent problems that come up. And then next, I just wanted to talk about COVID and how that might have changed government standards for auditing. But obviously during the pandemic, the government was having a handout really funds quickly with businesses to help them out. So what the Government Accountability Office did was they advised auditors to assess when the engagement started. And if it started before the pandemic, then they advised them to reassess the fraud risk of that audit. Because obviously the changing environment made them more susceptible to committing frauds, such as like companies struggling with financial stability, they have more incentive to commit fraud, and then also the pay like large payments for COVID relief could be disguised as fraud too. So the Government Accountability Office also released a GAGA's audit alert, and that helped connect guidelines and considerations for COVID during this time. But now that the pandemic has passed, I just thought it'd be interesting to see if changes are made to help catch fraud in times in the future where quick action is needed by the government. And then lastly, I wanted to talk about how AI might affect GAGAs. So obviously, as auditors are implementing AI tools more in their work, I think it's also going to increase cybersecurity and data privacy issues because you're giving these tools access to sensitive audit information. So what government auditors need to be aware of is the permissions and documents that are sharing with AI to prevent data leaks, both externally and internally. So internally, this can happen if an employee who shouldn't have access to like sensitive audit documents the AI has access to those documents, obviously. And then the employee who should not have access can ask the AI questions and obtain information about documents that they should not be able to. So auditors should just be aware of that just for separation of duty purposes. And then lastly, but yeah, our graphs, we see that this isn't as related as AT or IT audit groups, but I think it can apply to all of auditing. So we see that in companies that use AI, they have a higher perceived threat of technology risks than companies that do not use AI. And then also the Government Accountability Agency looked into this and looked at selected government agencies, and 10 of the 12 said that data privacy policies prevent obstacles to adopting generative AI in their work. So that just shows that this is something that auditing is worried about as a whole, but also in government auditing. So just as AI rapidly expands, I think we can expect to see more future frameworks, such as the one on the top. That's one that the Accountability Office released, and I think we can expect to see more of those in the future.
And so one of the bigger scandals that I found in regard to governmental auditing occurred in the 2008 to 2010 years, and it was a part of the Department of Defense that was obligating over $380 billion to different defense contractors all around the United States. That number was a drastic increase from previous years, like in 2022 or 2002, it was double the amount from then. And in response to this, they created the Defense Contracts Audit Agency, the DCAA, that was charged with contractor oversight. So they were in charge or to make sure that there was no fraud, waste, abuse, or mismanagement occurring. And in 2008, the Governmental Accountability Office, who, as you stated, is in charge of kind of creating and sharing the yellow book, found numerous problems with the DCAA and quality work in several California locations. A lot of these things, the issues that they found were widespread quality issues. There were 14 audits and 62 forward pricing reports that were not performed up to standards. And there were several instances of bribery and coercion in order to get the auditors to alter their findings, which were adverse, to get changed to unmodified. Later investigations of the DCAA showed that these problems were actually agency-wide, as 65 of the 69 audits they reviewed exhibited serious deficiencies and just bigger problems. I couldn't find a ton of detail or depth of details on many other instances of this, but there was a kind of collection of these issues that are present throughout different governmental auditing standards or scandals, which included independence failures with pressure for agencies and political interference. There was poor documentation where there was missing evidence or altered work papers. There was a lack of professional skepticism with accepting management explanations without further testing. And there was a failure to investigate red flags that were coming up in these audits. There was also weak supervision and quality control, with failed peer reviews and inexperienced staffing being advanced to managements. And there was a failure to follow required procedures with inadequate sampling and incomplete audit steps.
So just to wrap up this presentation and conclude, as Anna talked about, GAGAS really grew out of the need for increased accountability when governmental spending increased in the 1960s. And there have been multiple revisions of these standards through the Yellow Book. And as Tommy mentioned, that new revision will be out in less than 2 weeks now. And as Kate talked about, with the new revision coming out, and just to consider GAGAS in general, it's important to keep in mind the changes that AI and COVID will lead to, as well as the increased focus on quality management over quality control. And lastly, as Megan talked about, even governmental auditing is not immune from scandals. So it's important for auditors to have professional skepticism and stay true to their ethical frameworks. Any questions?
So first of all, you said 2 weeks. So Tommy, you're gonna have an update for the class in 2 weeks on the Thursday.
Yeah, I guess, sure.
You said that the previous standards were 2018, and the current standards are being updated for 2024. Do you think that 6 years is a sufficient time frame for updates to take place?
I think, well, you had to get input from a lot of basically the whole industry of auditing, with the government, all the different kinds of government, the financial experts, and the one that I'm forgetting, the academia. So compiling all that information, I think, and also the passage of time with multiple different new things, I think it will definitely need to be shorter coming in the coming few years because of major technological changes with AI and stuff like that. But it's kind of the double-edged sword where you want more time to get all the information and input from multiple different sources, but you also want to apply that to different. You also want to have a shorter time to reflect the time more. So it's right now, I think it might be better to get shorter times, but still there is value in having a little more time to get all the input.
It's basically a trade-off that's shift and manage. You mentioned performance audits are part of the Yellow Book. What is a performance audit?
I didn't look too much into that. I'm I'm guessing here that it's just going, actually going into, like what we saw the internal auditors going to the physical places instead of looking at documents and stuff like that.
So similar to an operational audit that we discussed.
Yeah, I'm pretty sure. Yeah.
No, we're very familiar with corporate scandals, and as Megan pointed out, the government agencies are not immune to scandals. Do you think that governmental auditing standards should be held to a higher criteria, a higher standard than our just kind of our traditional public audit, our public accounting standards, our ACCT, ACCT standards?
I just think that the like what's at stake is higher when it comes to government money. Like that is money that is coming from taxpayers, and it is meant to go towards programs and contracts that are meant to benefit taxpayers. So I feel like it's just a higher risk of the misuse of that money because it is like meant for everyone. There was also another occurrence that I found in the news during COVID. There were Mississippi like officials that were essentially taking a lot of what was supposed to be like COVID relief money and like supposed to benefit the people of Mississippi, and they were taking it and spending it on like football tickets and just like different entertainment things. And so I just think that like when that money is meant to benefit the people, there should be more scrutiny involved in making sure that it actually is going where it's supposed to go.
Is there an argument that this is beyond the scope of auditing to address? And what I mean by that is there's well-known documentation of corruption with respect to government funding and government operations themselves. And while we can develop better standards to kind of identify these problems, that doesn't stop the scandals themselves from occurring in the first place. It just helps detection of those. Is an argument that improving standards won't actually fix the problem?
Yes, but I think the standards are meant to build up the like aspirations. Like if your standards are still low, then people are going to not aim very high and making sure that like they're doing what they're supposed to be doing. When you raise the standards, it's easier to like raise your expectations that people should be doing what they're supposed to be doing. And I think with the standards being changed, it is supposed to like expose the areas in which expectations are not being lived up to.
Any other questions?
In regards to the revisions, do you know why it takes a full year for the revision to go into effect?
I'm just guessing like do give like the audit organizations time to make the changes, like the quality management, they have to set the system. That's always going to take time to develop and implement, so that would be my guess.
Could also be due to political factors, like if one GAO, one administration wants to create one, that has to go through Congress and Senate probably, or have to go through at least some political review instead of just being put out right away. And then like having to review it 1 year later is more towards the actual application of it, making sure that it is up to good, it has good standard. And yeah, so there's two places where it could be. That's where there's you take a year to implement and then a year to review.
But one last question. Let's assume that you all go to karaoke to celebrate your presentation after this. Who's going to be the most likely to sing a Lady Gaga song?
Megan.
I don't even know. I know.
I don't know Poker Face.
I do know Poker Face.
That's worth it.
My answer. I think I'm not the best singer, but I've been known to release my inhibitions. I know. See, that's a song I'd be more likely to sing.
Yeah.
Alrighty. Hello, everyone. My name is Sadie,
I'm Bennett. I'm Josh. I'm Alex. I'm Ethan.
and today we're going to be talking about artificial intelligence inside of auditing and assurance. So before we begin, let's touch on a few terms that we've talked about throughout the semester. So obviously we know that auditing is a subcategory of assurance, and we know that assurance is just the independent professional services that improve the quality of information in decision makers. But then for auditing, we know that that provides assurance for financial activities to make sure that they are properly recorded and reported and up to the standards. And then we also know that artificial intelligence, also known as AI, is just the simulation of human intelligence by machines, enabling them to learn, reason, and make decisions. Now let's kind of talk about how AI has been slowly incorporated into auditing and assurance. Starting back in the 1980s, this is when the first introduction of AI became into auditing, and this was primarily integrated through expert systems, which was designed to mimic human judgment by decision making. This was pretty limited in capacity, but it also laid the foundation for future integration of AI. Moving on to the 2000s, this is when the idea of big data was super popular. And this is when auditors started transforming between manual data sampling into more of a data-driven sampling. And they did this by adding AI-driven tools. And this kind of helped provide that we were able to analyze a larger amount of financial information over a large period of time. And then lastly, into the 2010s, this is when the idea of modern AI became pretty popular. And this is when we just started integrating it into more fraud detection and predictive analytics. And not only were we able to process data through AI, but we were also able to learn from it. And so this kind of helped benefit not only processing data, but also being able to identify anomalies, assess risk, and to anticipate any future issues.
Great, so now we can look at our current status of AI in the audit process. So we have some major uses of AI in the audit process. First one we can look at is repetitive task performance. So AI is used for a lot of repetitive tasks such as data entry, sorting, reconciliations, and report generation. A lot of the times, actual human auditors, this would take them a good amount of time to do these tasks, but AI can do that very quickly. The next one we can look at is fraud detection. So AI is going to help assist in identifying these risk patterns and fraudulent activities. It'll help to easily allow for detection and mitigation of potential issues. And then it can help strengthen the overall integrity of the financial reporting. And then next, there's analyzing a vast amount of data. This helps to once again detect those risks and make sure that there's proactive risk identification and assessment. Next, we will look at some benefits of AI for the auditors. With this repetitive tasks, it helps the auditor focus more on higher level analysis and judgments. They can work on more complex activities that they can better spend their time, and they don't have to worry about sitting there and going through everything. As well, those repetitive tasks can help focus on the interpretation of data, extraction, and document review. They can sit there and actually go through and review the documents, and they don't have to worry about those data entries and all things like that. And then lastly, the strategic analysis and judgments can help to able to improve the efficiencies of while auditing full data sets and better spend their time reviewing these and make sure that the AI is doing all the data entry. And then as well, obviously, we're going to have some implementation challenges that come with using AI in your companies. The first one we'll look at is upskilling. So upskilling is basically you're becoming proficient in using these tools. That would be using the AI. You're going to see a lot of the times that you're spending a lot of time learning how to use AI, a lot of money using these AI software. So you're using a lot of resources and investments in the companies. The next one is data privacy and security. Obviously, AI auditing uses a lot of cloud storage for their offsite security. So you don't know whether or not it's secure when you're actually using AI in that. So the auditors, they must basically make sure that everything's secure and not everything is being, there's no cyber threats that come with it. And lastly, we have our over-reliance on technology. Obviously, AI can enhance a lot in the audit process, but we don't want to get too stuck on using AI. You don't want to, obviously, the professional judgments and critical thinking of auditors is better. So CPAs have to kind of strike a balance in between utilizing technology, but also using their expertise for identifying different things, making decisions, and providing the client with needed stuff.
All right, so let's talk about the current status of assurance. AI significantly strengthens assurance quality. AI is able to test full populations of data, reducing risk and increasing reliability. KPMG, one of the big four accounting firms, has developed an AI called Clara AI. It can analyze millions of transactions, flag countless anomalies, and provide endless enhanced audit evidence for their auditors' reports. With all this in mind, this can lead to more accurate conclusions and higher confidence for the auditors making their reports. AI enhances auditor judgment, it doesn't replace it. So AI's other capabilities includes data extraction, document review, and anomaly scanning in record time. This allows auditors to provide more time to perform their professional judgments at the end of their auditing reports. KPMG and companies such as PwC also implement a human in the loop protocol in their AI databases, basically meaning that whatever evidence the AI supports the auditor with, it supports their better judgment, but ultimately the auditor has the final say in the decision-making process. AI improves the quality of evidence and documentation. It has the ability to read contracts, analyze meeting minutes, look through invoices and disclosures instantaneously, while also highlighting issues and inaccuracies within the evidence that the auditor has provided the AI with. Excuse me, Clara AI's strongest suit is that it's able to suggest where testing needs to be strengthened in order for auditors to perform more testing control. AI also checks accounting requirements to confirm that all the information needed in the audit report is included in the audit report. With all this in mind, this reduces human error and makes documentations more consistent and complete. Now let's talk about internal audit's role and how it expands into AI governance. PwC states that we must evaluate AI bias, transparency, data governance, cybersecurity, and compliance with COSO-based controls. The internal audit assesses AI inventory, assuring that the company knows what AI tools are in use and where the data flows and how risks are being monitored. So some research that proves that AI increases assurance. I read a study through the American Journal of Humanities and Social Sciences research team. Through that study, they performed a multiple regression model, and in their findings, they concluded that AI-based data analytics had the strongest positive effect on audit quality. They also confirmed that AI-assisted risk assessments improves identification and audit risks. They also concluded that AI-driven fraud detection improved finding fraud earlier for the auditor in their examination of documents and records. Ultimately, AI enhances assurance, accuracy, consistency, and reliability. And finally, there are a couple of key challenges that still exist with AI assurance. Regulatory standards still lag behind, sometimes making it hard to validate where the AI grabbed its generated evidence. And of course, with all other types of AI programs, they still may generate inaccurate results if not properly monitored.
So now looking at the future considerations for audit. So the first thing, continuous and real-time auditing. So obviously with AI, there's now a possibility of having that continuous auditing instead of just doing it once a year pretty much. It just makes it more in real time instead of looking at it a few months later. So the main purpose is just reducing the delay between when an issue actually arises and when it's actually detected and handled. So it's just really trying to make it kind of turns auditing, making it more just preventative and proactive. The next thing is the shift in auditor skill sets. So probably just moving into the future, auditors will have to be more open and comfortable working with AI. It'll be important for them to understand, what the AI is doing, understanding the conclusions it comes to, and interpreting those analytical results. So instead of just kind of being compliance checkers, they'll more be like analysts or consultants with the AI, making sure what they're doing is correctly, and just understanding those data interpretation, looking at the trends, looking at the patterns and the conclusions. Then the algorithmic transparency and bias. So the auditors will need to explain why AI is flagging something. Obviously AI is really powerful, but it's not perfect. So if AI is either trained on historical data, if that data includes things like biases or gaps, then it's highly likely that the AI is going to replicate those when working in the future. So the auditors need to make sure it's watching out for those, along with another problem called the black box problem, which is when AI flags something for being risky, even though the auditor may not actually understand why. So the auditors always need to make sure that they can explain why that certain thing was being flagged and why it's risky. The next thing is regulatory and ethical oversight. So as AI is kind of being more implemented into auditing, it's really important for a lot of these regulators, such as PCAOB, AICPA, just to be making sure that they're setting standards or rules for how AI can be used. So some things they should kind of think about, maybe who is responsible if AI makes an error, how much human review should be done if using AI, what should the documentation process be for if AI is used to get if it's an AI driven result or solution or decision. So just important things like that to make sure AI is compliant and ethical and making sure these firms and people aren't just worried about efficiency. The next thing is human judgment remains central. So just making sure auditors are still using professional skepticism and their judgment, because obviously AI can go through data pretty well, but it isn't the best at evaluating things such as the business context, the management intent, tone at the top, even the ethical climate. So just really important things like that. So just making sure that the auditor is staying on top of those things. And then lastly, rethinking materiality. Obviously, auditors are usually just more focused on big dollar items. Obviously, those are more important. But now with AI possibly control or being able to review most transactions, maybe even all the transactions, they can even look at smaller irregularities because those can be important, especially if they kind of indicate a larger risk pattern. So that kind of changes, kind of moving forward into the future, that could possibly change materiality and making it not only about size, but also about the significance or frequency, or even like the patterns behind all those transactions.
So now we're kind of getting some future considerations through assurance. One of the main things, like how will AI continue to improve? One of the biggest things is just increasing efficiency overall data analysis. And this is mainly through one of the branches of AI are called NLPs, which is just natural language processing. Essentially what these NLPs can do is they take just large, unorganized, unstructured data sets, and they're able to essentially spit out information to the user in an organized and like easily understandable fashion. So it's easier for, like I said, users to understand what the data actually means. So kind of like what a lot of people have been saying, so like this can be really helpful in document review. So they're starting to get to the point now where it can be used in like compliance checks or like, different like legal documents. Obviously, especially in a lot of those, if there's like litigations or things of that nature, sometimes there's a lot of information in those, in those papers and stuff like that. And it's gonna be nice for the auditor just to go through and pick out the key information that's actually relevant and as necessary, to be looked at for risks. Next is sentiment analysis. This is another thing. This is mainly more for like customer service. This is where it's able to look at, emails or calls and kind of pinpoint certain, like keywords or phrases that are repeated over and over again. This kind of like see where the pressure points are, the risks are in certain sectors. This can help the company reevaluate and see how they can fix that issue. And lastly is like knowledge management. This is kind of like essentially what the NLPs are. It's where it's just able to take like this unstructured data and turn it into structured data. And I kind of relate to this a little bit with like whenever I was at an auditing internship this past summer. A lot of times I was on 4 different engagements in my time there, and each one, like sometimes for each subsidiary, they'd have a different way they record something than the other. So it can be kind of confusing for first year employee to understand what's really going on. So sometimes having something like an NLP, which should translate this information, which doesn't make sense to me, to actually translate into something that I understand that's easily organized and things of that nature. And lastly, it's very good at it's still improving on predictive insights. Obviously, a lot of companies are using AI in historical data in order to make predictive insights. This is really good for like risk forecasting. So essentially, instead of the company reacting when a risk actually occurs, they can be more proactive, and see how we can either mitigate the risk or remove it entirely. And that kind of goes hand in hand with the resource optimization. Based on whatever risk may occur or like what the risk might be, you can allocate resources to essentially, like I said, mitigate or remove risk altogether. And lastly, this is good for like customer retention. A lot of these predictive models are good at identifying patterns or trends. And these patterns and trends could really help show like which sector might be doing better than another. This can help shift, capital and time to the sector that, is actually profitable compared to the less profitable one. And now we're kind of getting into like risks and other considerations. Kind of like what everyone else was saying with AI, obviously, there's still the issue that remains with maltransparency, data integrity. There's still really sometimes whenever you ask AI to give you models, it doesn't always explain where it gets its data or, how the model actually came to what it is being presented as. So especially if we start using a lot of AI for customer services, we really need the transparency to be there for customers to really trust where that, where we're getting our information from. Next is operational vulnerabilities. Josh touched on this a little bit as well, where obviously no accounting is really done on pen and paper anymore. It's really all in the cloud. So the more AI that's being used, there's just more opportunities for cybersecurity vulnerabilities. So just making sure that the security around the cloud is on high alert at all times and making sure that nothing happens with that. And the last two, like I said, kind of hand in hand with ethical challenges and professional challenges. Like Bennett was saying, just making sure there's not an over-reliance on AI. Obviously, AI, we've been told, is a great tool to use, but to make sure to still use your professional skepticism and you're still, in charge of making the decisions at the end of the day. And kind of lastly, with professional challenges, currently with assurance, there is really no regulations around assurance and using AI in assurance. So essentially, if AI starts to be more prevalent in our services, governance bodies need to start making regulations in order to kind of, not make it such a gray area.
All right, just to wrap everything up, let's look at 3 key takeaways. First, we know that AI is obviously enhancing our audit and assurance quality just by automating our tasks, detecting fraud, and for strengthening our evidence. However, we do know that human judgment seems to still remain central just for ethical reasons and professional skepticism. And lastly, the future success of auditing also depends on balance. So we need to remember that enhancing AI's efficiency, but also addressing challenges like transparency and bias is important to take into consideration. Are there any questions?
All right, so I'm trying to read through my notes now. Okay, one of the things that I think is interesting about AI is the idea that we can do continuous auditing, continuous monitoring, or even just do full population testing. But it seems to me that that is fairly heavily predicated on the nature of the client that we're working on. So if you've got a really, really high quality auditor, but the client themselves are still working in the dark ages, so to speak, is it possible to employ AI tools in an effective manner in that situation?
I mean, I guess probably not. I guess you would have to really understand what your client wants and what they want from you. So I would probably say no. I don't know if they aren't comfortable with using AI, because I feel like you probably have to check with your client on what they feel comfortable with and how they want you to do their audit. So, I mean, if they're not fine with you using it and documenting it properly, then it probably would be best not to use it. I mean, you could lose that client if you do something they're not really happy about.
I also think another disadvantage is that auditors who have been with clients for several years have that advantage of knowing their past history and everything. And I think that plays into benefit for risk assessment purposes because you know their history of all their financial statements versus AI is just now recently coming into audit. And so they can do this continuous audits, but only when they first started using AI. So that may be in the last like 5 years versus this auditor might be with the client for the 40. So it would take a long time for AI to catch on to their past history. So it'd be good for future purposes, especially if it's like a younger client versus like a company that's been around for a very long time. I think that it'd be more beneficial to use humans instead of AI.
Well, the word transparency was bandied about quite a bit. In this context, I think it was used for algorithmic transparency and model transparency. One of the problems that I think has been kind of pronounced about AI development is that AI developers, the big AI companies, are notoriously resistant to letting people see how they develop their models or develop their algorithms. Do you see that being an impediment to AI development for industries like public accounting and specifically auditing, if we can't see what the backbone is of the algorithms and the models that are being developed?
Absolutely. I think that considering public companies also need to like explain all of their financial statements, they always need to be public. That's why they're called a public company. Not having the reasoning behind like where the AI is coming from could be a definite risk in providing like full transparency for all their information.
Then you made the comment about how about upskilling and the importance. That was one of the kind of the opportunities or challenges, I think, is in the future. Ignoring the fact that we're still trying to get our feet under us at Truman State, and especially with accounting about how we better teach AI. Do you think that this needs to be a specific series of AI tools that students need to be learning how to operate, or is this more of a general skill set that students need to develop?
I think that everybody could use like learning how to use AI, whether or not it is in schools and stuff, because my past internship this last summer, even they talked about like we need to start using AI and like implementing it more. So I think if different resources can start like teaching students how to use it in a way, I think that would better prepare them for getting into like internships and stuff and being adjusted to that, so that obviously like those companies aren't having to take their time away for people to learn how to use AI and stuff.
Other questions?
I would say, well, kind of building off of Josh, that's kind of how similar was my internship as well. Well, we actually had like a full like 2 or 3 day course where we just learned about how we use our AI portal. Obviously, I worked at an intern at Big Four firm, so they have their own, specific, AI through their cloud. So obviously, it kind of varies per company, but I think just having just a basic like foundation would be nice, and it would help obviously make understanding, understanding their AI a lot easier if we had something to build off of.
But I do also think it's important to know where the AI is getting their information, or like how it's calculating what it is, because if you don't know the basics of where it's getting from, then you have no idea where you're getting the information from. You're not gonna be able to explain what it's giving you. So I think still knowing the basics of everything is important.
Questions? Nice work. AI and auditing, two of my favorite things to talk about. What a way to end the day. Not that I didn't enjoy Gagos, but still, yeah. We have one more presentation on Friday, so I'll see you all then.